Hi, everyone. I'm speaking with Aditya Pendyala today. Adi is a partner at FEBE Ventures, a global early stage VC firm that is super active in the Southeast Asia region. FEBE, or FEBE, actually stands for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So, uniquely, the firm is actually led by a team of ex founders who have collectively built over 30 companies and have backed over 200 startups, right? Adi has personally invested in companies like Sociolla, Turtlemint, and TR Mobility. Adi has been incredibly supportive of my own founder journey, and I've always been able to rely on Adi for advice and perspective. What really makes Adi's story really interesting is that his focus in the region and his journey and how he got here, right? So before FEBE Ventures, he spent a decade founding, building, and exiting his startup Mnubo in Canada, which was a startup that was developing AI for IoT. But now he's in our backyard, flying across Southeast Asia, investing in promising startups. It seems like you're in a different country every single week. But first of all, thanks, Adi, for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, Chris. Thanks a lot for the gracious invite. I really appreciate the collaboration. I always enjoy our conversations, and thank you for thinking of me as you're putting this together. And appreciate the very kind intro as well.
For sure. Many people talk about Southeast Asia as one market, right? But most investors and operators know that it's made of many distinct markets, all with their own promise and challenges, right? So you're focused in investing in this region. So I think you're the perfect person to talk to help us understand what's really kind of going on here and how to invest successfully here. So again, I'm super excited to speak with you today. Let's just jump straight in. I'm going to get started. Could you just share what FEBE Ventures is, right? Like, what does your team invest in? What do you stand for? And most importantly, after exiting your company, why did you decide to join FEBE Ventures as an investor in the first place? You could have done anything, right? Could you just share a little bit there?
Of course. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the question and appreciate the fact that it gives me a chance to introspect and share with the audience. FEBE Ventures is a global seed-focused VC firm. It's an early stage firm with a global mandate focusing on high potential startups. In Fund 1, we started out in Southeast Asia. Actually, our origins were in Vietnam. And our deep expertise was in emerging markets. And then in Fund 2, we expanded with a rather wider global investment mandate, leveraging our experience to back exceptional founders, but worldwide. We are a bit of an international team, right? Our partners span 3 continents. We have a global perspective. We tap into our regional insights and strengths. And largely it's because we have been around as founders in the ecosystem long enough. We have established global networks that we bring into the dialogue. The ethos, and as you pointed out, the name FEBE stands for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So we built this kind of a VC firm, which is artisanal and global in nature, where we wish we had firms like this backing us when we were founders. So it's not just about money, but it's about real support, candid feedback, and hands-on help that we as founders have experienced. In some way, if you ask the partners at FEBE, they say they want to be the first call founders make when things get tough and just not when things are going well. Now, second part of the question is, why did I join FEBE? And you're quite right. It wasn't a very obvious choice to join venture capital in the first place, not FEBE. I think when I sat back and looked at my own founding journey and spent some time with my family and my wife to introspect on where I could be adding more value, it felt natural to be and more fulfilling to be a part of an operator-led fund. Look, I've been a founder, and I know how valuable it is to have investors who have actually built companies. So in my mind, FEBE was not just another VC firm. It was a team of ex-founders who understood the highs and lows firsthand and wanted to serve and be of service. I'm personally also very keen to give back and share my learnings after building, scaling, and exiting Mnubo and having worked as founding members of previous startups. I wanted my next chapter to be more about empowering the new wave of founders, specifically in emerging markets. Right, there's a lot I wish I learned earlier in my journey, and being able to pass on that knowledge and be a thought partner to these founders is incredibly rewarding personally. And why Southeast Asia, you ask? It's key sorry. What's key is stimulating founder support in Southeast Asia and beyond. The best ecosystems thrive when successful founders reinvest and mentor the next generation. I see myself playing a small role in that equation. And I wanted to be part of that culture where experienced entrepreneurs actively support fund and advise emerging founders. So that's why I find myself here. And to be very honest, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I'm thoroughly enjoyed my journey so far.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you here, right? I think last episode I was talking to Hiro Kiga. Not sure if you met him, but he talked about the right to invest, right, as a VC, right, and that's why he was started in VC before, and he actually quit and he started his own startup, and now he's back into potentially VC investing, right? So I think that's super powerful when you have a VC firm that knows what it's like to be a founder, and I think a lot of founders really wish that their investors had more experience or could provide more value, right, in that sense. So yeah, the next question, I think I want to dig a little bit deeper about Southeast Asia. Uh, I know this could be a topic that we could spend hours and hours and hours on, but maybe I think like just briefly, right? Like, could you talk a little bit about what it's like or why you want to invest in Southeast Asia, or why it's promising, or what makes you excited?
First of all, a very thoughtful anecdote you had shared earlier, and I think it's the right to invest, but I think there is a step up, which is the right to advise entrepreneurs. You cannot claim to have played a basketball game without being on the court. You can't advise from the sidelines. And I think this is where I feel FEBE and this new generation of operator-led funds are having an immense impact, specifically in emerging and growth markets, which is a great segue to your question about Southeast Asia. Look, we have read all the reports, and it's experiencing explosive growth over the past decade, and it's set to become what I believe is about a $300 billion digital economy by 2025. Millions of new customers coming online every year. It's the second aspect is, and we've spoken about this in a few ways. We're talking about a young, tech savvy, and what I call a digital first population. The appetite and ability to consume technologies from the get go is tremendous. In some way, they've leapfrogged traditional development models, right? They've leapfrogged some of the peers in the West because fintech, logistics, e-commerce, they're coming with a digital first and digital native mandate in this specific market. Second part is the dynamic and diverse nature of the ecosystem. So every country has a different flavor. I think you led that in your opening remark, and I almost find it a little tough to call Southeast Asia as my focus, because I tend to specifically call out Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and in each of these regions because each of them have their own peculiarities. And frankly, that's what keeps things exciting, because any corner of the Southeast Asia could spawn the next market shaping opportunity, which is very fit for market and very purposeful for the region they serve. The third reason is a general massive shift in digital infrastructure and inclusion, both on the financial, education, healthcare, and wellness side, right? You've certainly seen a lot of access being available, which means it's creating a whole bunch of opportunities in financial services, infrastructure, manufacturing. The part I feel most excited about is, as the regions mature, they're starting to play to their own strengths. So I'm highly opinionated about a fit for market startup. So Indonesia has a natural core competency around some level of ag tech, some level of financial services, logistics and supply chain, resources. Vietnam have some core competency around software technology, manufacturing, and that's also true for Indonesia. Both regions, for that matter, have core competency in green energy and green tech, where Indonesia is seen as a pioneer around EV with its vertical integration with the nickel-based mines, all the way to batteries and fleets. And on the Vietnam side, we're seeing wind and solar adoption at unprecedented scales. So this ability to take a larger macro theme and be very regionally specific is what's very exciting to me. And the last part is, I feel we're at that point where the startup culture it's coming to its own. 10 years ago, Southeast Asia was looking at the US, India, and China for lookalike models. Now the region is developing its own playbooks and producing its own winners on its own terms. And more experienced founders are building their second or third startups. And this is creating a stronger, more mature ecosystem. And these 3 or 4 points are where I feel most excited about Southeast Asia.
Got it. Got it. Thanks for sharing that, Adi. Um, I want to talk a little bit more around like understanding these markets, right? So I operate a business in Singapore, Indonesia, and in Vietnam, and it's like incredibly difficult, right, to understand all of these markets right at the same time. I always feel like I'm missing some sort of context, either whether it's cultural, whether it's business related. Um, and technically speaking, FEBE Ventures, right, apart from Singapore, you'll probably be an outsider in almost every other market, right? Now, the question is like, how do you and FEBE overcome this, right? Like by overcome, I mean, how do you develop like a local level understanding of a market so that you can create these theses that are, accurate
It's
into the
an
world?
excellent question, and I wish, Chris, this was asked to more investors and frankly to more founders as well. Look, it's not easy. It's not easy because there isn't a template out there that one can follow. In fact, there are very few examples of multi-market and multi-regional plays that come. I would like to answer this question by combining two of the points you mentioned in the intro. One, you said, you see, I'm in a different country or on the road a lot. And I responded by also saying that we're artisanal in nature. And some way here is the secret recipe we have in place. We spend a lot of time meeting grassroots founders. The best insights come from those actually building on the ground and not just from reports and high level conversations. These founders navigate local challenges daily and they provide the real pulse of the market. One of the things I love to do in every city I go is I organize a founders lunch. Maybe two, three of the portfolio companies we have invested in, but a whole bunch of others who are a cross section of the region. And we put open ended questions out there about company building, culture, expansion, and I get to learn a lot from these conversations. Second is meeting established grassroots operators, people who have been running sales, operations, product. They give a very deep understanding of what really works. They talk about barriers to adoption, hiring challenges, execution realities that aren't really well understood and very nuanced to the market. Third is we're a very small team, actually, Chris. We're just four partners in the investment team. That's it, right? There are no analysts, no principals, no associates. So we have to be extremely active and careful in listening and working with our local partners. And we have already said this Southeast Asia isn't one market. So we work with unique ecosystem and local experts and partners in each of these regions, be it Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, or elsewhere. And we definitely prioritize these long-term relationships with these trusted local investors, advisors, and industry leaders for that matter. And the last point is something I'll be mentioning a few times in our conversation, this notion of understanding what are fit for market models and
Mm,
local archetypes. So I'm heavily opinionated on that. What makes a successful founder build a market to serve Vietnam is significantly different than that's required by Indonesia or other regions. So the ability to understand local
mm,
consumer behavior, regulatory nuances,
right.
infrastructure gaps, these aren't apparent when you come with a template at assessing these opportunities. So each country will have its distinct startup and founder archetypes. And what works for us is identifying those patterns and differences and mapping our own value add and seeing if we have the right to invest or engage in these
Got it.
opportunities.
That's super interesting, right? I think it's, I mean, obviously a very difficult task, but and it takes up all of your time, right? But for someone else to do this, I mean, for someone who is, let's say, casually investing, it would be extremely difficult, right? I want to dig a little bit deeper into something you mentioned about how different countries have different consumer behaviors, right? And by that extent as well, how the B2B landscape also differs from different Southeast Asian countries. Sorry. Um, could you share maybe one or two of Phoebe's kind of theses, right? In one or two of those countries in Southeast Asia, right? Whether it's like you mentioned, like fintech in Indonesia, or if it's like green tech in Vietnam. Could you just share really quickly, like one or two of those theses?
To that, I think it's important for me to share it in the context of an understanding of the market. In Southeast Asia, B2B hasn't really hit prime time. And the reason is we're working in a macro environment, what we call a broad-based pyramid. And what that means is there's a whole bunch of MSMEs that pack in the B2B lower end of the spectrum and a handful of top enterprise. But the mid market is fairly shallow. And when you look at the developing or developed markets for that matter, that is very dense. The mid-market is a lot more dense with opportunity and digital adoption. So to react to that, I think there are still opportunities in fintech, but you have to adapt it for the regions you operate in. Like the adoption of cash on delivery versus digital wallet distinctly varies between Vietnam and Indonesia. There's a whole question of SaaS readiness, right? There's a minimum per capita income required for an economy to be considered SaaS ready. And frankly, only Singapore really checks that box today compared to global standards. So maybe that'll impact how you build a B2B company, where you can go with a SaaS or a self-serve model in Singapore, but you actually need a field sales stream in Indonesia and elsewhere for the same product type. So our archetypes are based on where is the macro pyramid, where are the distinct opportunities in this region, and how is the go-to-market and the value proposition adapting to that region. Hence, we try to shy away from the word are you a regional play, but we use terms like are you a multi-market play, and how are you adapting your core thesis to penetrate into new markets. And the last part is it's still a very relationship driven society. So the sales cycle and the sales engagements in B2B sales primarily are largely relationship driven because of the large conglomerates that exist here. So having some level of domain expertise, local presence, and trust building is a prerequisite. So it cannot be a tech first sale, which works wonderfully well in the West, but may not be the way it would work in Southeast Asia. So my encouragement to the B2B founders here is to genuinely carve out your ICP as clearly and as narrowly as possible to, to see if you have an initial product market fit, and then refine your go-to-market motion with some scalable, repeatable sales in one region, dominate it, and then adapt it for the next market or next region you intend to penetrate.
Yep, I think I completely agree with that. Right, I think there is a minimum, GDP per capita in a country for SaaS to become viable. Right, I think the cost of productivity or labor is just way too low. Right, why would you pay for software when you can hire an additional headcount? And I think so. Maybe B2B, can't be tied to SaaS, right? Maybe there are other unique business models that need to be explored to make a business viable in Southeast Asia. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure, Chris. If I may quickly respond to that, I think that I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. I try when I use B2B, I dissociate that with SaaS because for me, SaaS is a distinct business model, right? There's a lot of B2B opportunities, but the business models may need to be adapted a bit more for the region. So one term that I try to work with founders is it can be SaaS, but instead of being software as a service, think of it as a solution as a service. And a solution may have a bit of software, may have a bit of advisory, a bit of services, but when packaged well, they're able to meet the customer at their maturity level. So you still end up providing value through the software you provide, but for adoption and maturity risks, you have to put in the rest of the elements in place and make it a packaged solution that is consumable by the market.
It makes a lot of sense. I want to talk a little bit about specific Southeast Asian markets that have, maybe surprised you, right, in terms of opportunities. I want to understand a little bit more of what that market is and what made them stand out. And somewhat related, outside of Singapore, which city or region do you think, or within Southeast Asia, has a chance to become a real tech hub, in your opinion?
Honestly, it's one of the parts of the job I enjoy the most, which is trying to understand the general trend lines. Now I've been in the region for over 3 years and serving under Mnubo just over a year and a half. So it's still early, but I can share with you my quick reaction to this. We are in a wave where the next crop of Southeast Asian countries are getting some significant spotlight. A good example is Philippines. It's a rising powerhouse. It's 100 million plus population, somewhere there, and one of the world's most active social media bases. Some stats absolutely surprised me about Philippines. The amount of disposable income per household is significantly higher than other regions in Southeast Asia, which means there are, in terms of consumption-driven economy, Philippines is notably higher than some of its peers. So e-commerce, fintech, they're booming, and these adoption curves are rather steep for that matter. The second one, and we tend to see them glimpses of that, is Vietnam. I call them the quiet achiever, right? They transform themselves from an outsourcing hub to an innovation hub. They always had engineering talent pedigree. They're a young population, and now they have, I think, between 5 to 8 unicorns under their belt. So that's already a testament to a region that's shaping, and where the regulation is also evolving and the globalization trends are also stepping in. So they're taking advantage of these larger macro trends. In terms of next big tech city, if I were to place my bet, I would I would do it on Ho Chi Minh. There is a vibe there, and I mentioned my founder lunches, which we host every now and then. There's a vibe there that mimics the energy of an early
Mm.
Bangalore, for example, where there's a talent density, there's a dynamic population, there's strong startup energy, and deep engineering pool. They're yet to crack the business aspect of it and the globalization aspect of it, but the right ingredients are in place for it to claim a much more notable place in the global stage in the next
Yeah, I
decade.
completely agree. I was in Vietnam like a month ago, and the energy, it's so palpable, right? Like you can feel the entrepreneurship kind of like vibe, right? And it also doesn't hurt that they drink copious amounts of coffee that keeps them going. Yeah, and yeah,
True. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I
yeah.
would also place my bets there as well. Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, the next tech hub of Southeast Asia. I want to get
Yeah.
into the current state of VC investing, right? I think everyone knows it's changed, right, over the past few years, right? Um, in your words, right, what is the current state of VC investment in Southeast Asia?
Look, this is a testy question, right? Because we have coined many phrases: tech winter, funding freeze, whatever, right? The reality is, if you've been in the sector long enough and seen it globally, this is normal. All of us go through a cycle. And part of doing this job well, and I'm not talking about VC, part of doing startups well is being a rational optimist. So the way I describe it is the frenzy has cooled to a healthy simmer, right? In 2021, 2022, record breaking year. I think it was about 10 billion in 2022 alone, it was deployed or something. And now we're shifting our mindset of quality over quantity, right? There's a market correction. I don't call it a crash. There's definitely a market correction, and it's a healthy one. Late stage deals have slowed down, valuations have normalized, early stage funding is bursty. I wouldn't, it's meeker than previous quarters, but bursty, especially for solid startups. I think it's in a way an excellent environment to test the resilience of the ecosystem and of the founders. Good companies get funded. That's my strong belief. Now the shift has been from growth at all costs to sustainable, thoughtful building. And there's a refocus on first principles and fundamentals and profitability that will drive this new era. I come from a place where I believe the funds and the ecosystem also need to be right sized. The analogy I'd like to use for this, Chris, is I think we've overwatered the garden, right? I think there was a little bit more care and pruning and nurturing required, but we overcapitalized a market that wasn't ready, and now we're dealing with the aftermath of that. I think if we're thoughtful in how we cultivate the right seedlings and nurture the ecosystem in the right way and do some symbiotic relationships there, we may have a much better harvest or produce in the next wave that's to come.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Indonesia, though, right? Because this is a country that's dear to me. There's a lot of negative like press and negative feelings about Indonesian tech, right? Early stage, not many companies are getting funded. There's a lot of companies actually, closing down. And I think to your point, yeah, you're right. I think it's right sizing, and I think more focus on the right fundamentals. But um, can you just share a little bit about your thoughts and opinion about Indonesia as a tech industry, right? Are we, just seeing a minor speed bump on a road to bigger things, or are there like major like structural issues that need addressing before the ecosystem can be healthy again?
It's a very telling question, Chris. And I'm personally also a big fan of Indonesia, and I've been. Look, my family's here, right? We're committed. We're committed in the region, and there's so much Indonesia has to offer the world. So I think the best is yet to come. Indonesia has been a victim to uh, the overwatering I mentioned, overcapitalization of the market, but also mismanaged expectations. You need a strong foundation, an ecosystem, certain level of market maturity in order for us to expect the size and the timing of those outcomes that led to the initial funding frenzy. I remain bullish. We're talking about a very not only notable part in Southeast Asia, but in the global landscape. Indonesia has a uh, lot of power because it's got one of the fastest growing middle class. It has energy. It has got a political clout, and it's just it's a thriving nation on its own. I do feel the success of Indonesia is going to be pegged based on startup that actually cater to Indonesia first before they cater from Indonesia.
Mm.
There have been a few successes here and there, but I think that number needs to significantly grow from this point on. So there needs to be more investments in tech consumption within Indonesia for
Mm.
Indonesia before we think of ourselves being as a tech exporter for the region. For that, we have to go back to the fundamentals of we have to invest in the right engineering schools, build the right type of risk capital ecosystem, encourage various forms of entrepreneurship, understand the public-private partnerships, and circumvent the challenges from regulatory frameworks. So there's a lot of work to be done,
Mm.
exciting work to be done, but a lot of it.
Mm.
And needless to say, the recent scandals have put a bad light. I think the challenge of these scandals is the ripple effect is always a lot worse.
Yeah.
So I think we're right in the mix of it. In some sense, it'll help clean up the market a bit further, but I feel there'll be uh, a lot more unlearning that we need to do before we reinvest in this ecosystem again. When I say we, I mean collectively putting our energy time into it. But I'm hugely bullish about the potential of Indonesia in the time to come. And I
Yeah.
think if founders who have found success in the past have a huge role to play in nurturing and mentoring the new crop of founders to come.
Yep, I completely agree. I think there is an overcorrection now, right? There are still amazing startups in Indonesia, amazing founders, amazing talent, right? And I think right now we're just seeing, yeah, possibly the bottom, right, of this whole kind of tech winter. I want to shift our conversation towards founders and company building now, right? And I know you just touched on this a little bit, but do you think it's important or necessary for founders in Southeast Asia to have a regional mindset from day one, right? I think the U.S., China, these are all homogenous like markets, right? They're not separated by oceans, right? And they're huge markets, and they're more easily captured, right? Um, but do you think that if you're starting a company, let's say, maybe not Singapore, I think Singapore, that's pretty obvious that you kind of have to. But let's say like in Vietnam or Indonesia or the Philippines, do you think that um, you need to have a regional focus, right? Immediately from day one?
Could you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you think if you're building a startup, let's say in Indonesia, the Philippines, or Vietnam, do you need to have a regional focus from day one? Meaning, like, do you need to have a strategy to go after, the other markets immediately?
I am a little bit of a contrarian to that thinking.
Mm.
Okay, I believe the founder archetype needs to embody global mindedness. When I mean global mindedness, they need to understand that learnings can come from elsewhere. That's one. But I believe from a startup building perspective, they need to think regional but execute local.
Mm.
So your ambition should be big, your culture should be large, but you need to start by dominating one market. So if when we're discussing with founders the plan to build a meaningful business at speed and eventually at scale doesn't start with dominating one market and it is reliant on this multi-market regional expansion, I usually challenge that. And the second part is I genuinely feel companies and founders need to avoid this expand too fast trap. You've got to conquer your home market first and then move strategically and surgically. Otherwise, you'll spread yourself too thin too soon. So, in general, when we have a discussion with founders, we ask, tell us your plan of achieving the 0 to 1, the 1 to 10 phase of company building in your local market. And then we can find the refinements and the adaptations required for you to extend that into a multi market or potentially a regional play.
That's great advice, Adi. I completely agree with you, right? I think spreading yourself too thin is, um, or lack of focus, right? I think is one of the major pitfalls for any startup founder. They get carried away too early. I want to talk more about founders, right? Phoebe Ventures obviously knows what a good founder looks like, right? But could you share like the type of archetype or specific qualities that you can identify in a founder? And having being one yourself, right? This definitely helps. Could you share what you guys look for in terms of traits and qualities?
Um, I'll give an Adi answer to this, right? And I think it's not only true for founders in Southeast Asia. I think it's true for founders globally. There are two, three qualities that jump out in initial conversation, which is why I feel the meeting in person is extremely important. The number one quality I think is self-awareness, because a great founder knows that they don't know everything, and they know how to build teams to kind of complete the picture and eventually move into building a meaningful company. The second quality is a level of resilience, grit that is almost unique to the founder archetype. The never say die attitude is integral, because I don't know one startup journey that goes this way. All of them have this roller coaster, all of them. And the ability to build and use your grit to galvanize teams and move all forward is what is the secret of building meaningful startups. So grit and resilience. And third is perseverance, because a company is made out of series of milestones, and the ability to have this unequivocal perseverance and ambition to get to that end goal is what allows them to charge forward ahead of the competition and sets them to achieve a venture scale outcome. So those are the three: self-awareness, resilience and grit, and perseverance are my go-to.
Yep, couldn't agree more there. So yeah, Adi, last question here, right? Um, just wanted to know if you had some advice, right, to all the founders out there who are thinking about building a startup in Southeast Asia, or maybe they're doing it right now. Maybe they're looking for VC investment, or maybe they're like you said, looking to build a company that has VC kind of level outcomes, right? What kind of advice could you share with them, especially in this type of market? Right.
Uh, if I may give it, it's rather philosophical and personal advice, is find out and stay true to your why, your purpose, your raison d'etre. Because during uncertain time, it's your why that provides you the grounding, the fuel, the meaning to move forward. And the reason I use that is, if one companies that have jumped too fast to the what and the how find themselves on shaky ground today. But the companies that have a very clear why, that are mission oriented, are able to reorient their teams, galvanize their teams, bring the energy together to find other ways of executing to reach their mission, despite the macro environment. So that's my main advice to founders: is use this moment to go back to your why and make the investments around you to operate as like a SWAT team, like a sports team, and knock off one milestone off the other. It's actually a great environment for founders to rebuild focus and show how they can operate under constraints. And the second piece of advice is, and I absolutely think it's a misfit for the market we're in, is lots of founders saying we need to scale up. Sorry for my French, but it's bullshit. Okay. Startups at the early stage need to be designed initially for speed. That's their competitive advantage. So you need to move quickly, not scale up. And I think that distinction is important. The ability to be nimble, navigate, innovate, stay ahead of the competition, capture market, that's where the focus would be. Once you do that methodically, you will eventually come upon a scalable, repeatable process, which will be your path to scaling up. So I would say focus on speed and agility versus going big. So those are my two pieces of advice.
Yeah, really good advice there, right? I think the being mission driven, I think resonates with me so much, right? I think a lot of founders don't really think enough about it, right? Like, can I spend the next 10 years of my life, building this company for this mission that I'm on, right? But yeah, thanks, Adi, for being here, right? Thanks for sharing all the insight. Every time I sit down with you, I learn so much. And yeah, all the best building up FEBE, and hope to see you soon.
To seeing you too, Chris. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Appreciate the collaboration. I always keep up with your posts on High Five, and I love the fact that you are unabashedly authentic and vulnerable in the way you lead. And it's genuinely an inspiration for me. I know I've mentioned this to you on our personal messages as well. So thank you for being you.
Yeah, that means a lot to me. Thank you, Adi. Have a great day.